Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Today we're going to talk about is fixing the housing crisis an election winner for Blue Collar Britain. We have a stellar panel. On my far left we have Kate Henderson, who's Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation. Then Esther McVey, Minister of State at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. On my right, Juliet, writer for the Daily Telegraph. And then on my far right, David Goodhart, Head of the Demography Unit at Policy Exchange. And I am Jack Airey, I'm Head of Housing at Policy Exchange. So why are we holding this event? Well, if you look at the YouGov's top issues facing the country tracker, first is Brexit, second is health, third is crime, fourth is the economy. So it reads like the banner, which is on that thing outside. And then fifth, immigration, sixth, housing. So we know it's important to what people think is important to their daily life. So I think renters feel like they're paying too much. Parents and grandparents are concerned that their kids aren't getting the same opportunity to own a home as they did. So it seems quite important to elections, so that's why I wanted to talk about it. Now, this panel, we want it to be about policy and politics. I thought I'd just quickly recount how people tend to vote by their tenure. So in 2017 election, the Tories won, had a lead of 25 over Labour for people who own their home outright. They have a 3-point lead for people who own their home with a mortgage. Now, I think I was kind of shocked when I saw that because people often think Tories are the party of the home ownership, but it's not as simple as that, I think. Then social renter, they've the minus 31 compared to Labour and minus 23 on private rental. I think it's just quickly worth going back to the 2010 election where the Conservative Party won the private rental vote. So we often think about how important it is, how private renters tend to vote Labour, but it's not as simple as that. 9 years ago, it wasn't the case. So I hope that kind of sets the scene. Today, just want to talk about, is it important to winning the next election, and therefore, how do we fix the housing crisis? So I think we're going to give 5 minutes to everyone to sit out their stall. First to Kate, then to Esther, then to Juliet, then to David. So, Kate.
Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you very much to all of you for coming here to this Housing Fringe. I think the fact that this room is absolutely packed just highlights how important housing is to each and every one of us. I'm from the National Housing Federation, and we represent housing associations in England. So our members own and manage just over 2,500 homes, and that's providing homes to over 6 million people. This session is around making sure housing is a priority for all parties, but also housing of all types and tenures. I think actually saying that parties are only appealing to one demographic and one type of homeowner or one type of renter actually is missing the fact that we're changing in terms of our demographics and we're changing in terms of the way that we're living, and actually home ownership rates have gone down. I think everybody would like to see them go up. But that is also not a reality for some people where their circumstances are now. In terms of why housing should be a priority, having access to a safe, secure, affordable home is the bedrock of our society. It means that, if you have a stable home, you're much more likely to do well at school, you're much more likely to be stable at school, having space in your home to do your homework. If you have a stable, affordable, secure home, you're much more likely to be well. If it's adaptable and meets your needs, you're much more likely to cost the health service less. And if you have a stable home, you're much more likely to be able to access work. So housing affects so many other areas of government policy. Now, at the National Housing Federation, we are focused on delivering homes of all tenure, but we are particularly focused on supporting people who have lower incomes. And that means we are calling for investment, in particular in social rented homes. But in order to get that investment in our social and affordable housing, we need to have public support, and we also need to have political support. And we have a responsibility to build that support. We published some research about a week ago that shows the true extent of the housing crisis in this country. And it shows that it's affecting more than 8 million people. So that's 1 in 7 people in England directly affected by the housing crisis. And people are affected in really different ways. So we have lots of people who are living in overcrowding. And when we talk about overcrowding, it's actually not just, children sharing a bedroom. It's when you've got a child sharing a bedroom with 2 or more siblings, or a child having to share a room with a parent, or a parent even having to sleep in the sitting room or the hallway or the kitchen because they don't have enough space. Our research also showed the extent of hidden households. So that's quite often couples who've had to move back home because they can't afford to live independently. We, through our research, found couples with children who had separated but couldn't actually afford to form separate households. We have millions of people who are concealed hidden households. And then we have people who are really struggling, whether to pay their mortgage or their rent. We have people who are living in unsuitable accommodation, particularly people as they get older, making sure that their homes are adaptable and accessible for them. And then at the very sharp end of the housing crisis, we have people who are homeless, who are rough sleeping, or are sofa surfing, or in hostels. And there's about 400,000 people in that category. And I think for all of us, it's really important to remember it doesn't have to be that way. We can solve the housing crisis, and we can do that through investment in homes, investment in place, investment in people. But in terms of that support, how do we build support? How do we ensure that the public, that voters actually want housing to be a political priority and want a solution for everybody who's affected? We have a strategy around 3 key points, and I'm just going to run through them briefly. The first is, as housing associations, that the homes we build need to be of the highest quality. Now, as housing associations, we provide long-term social rented homes, homes of other intermediate tenures. We provide shared ownership homes. We also do placemaking. We invest in community. And I think quality is vitally important to us as a sector, but it's also vitally important in terms of consent, to actually ensure we're getting the right homes in the right places, that we are building homes that are beautiful, that are sustainable, and that we bring the public with us with that. And I know that that's something that Jack is very big on. Our second theme is around trust. Now, if we want the public to want more social housing, and if we want politicians to decide to invest in more social housing, housing associations need to be trusted partners. We need to be trusted by our tenants by providing a really good, accountable, good quality service. We need to be trusted by our local authority partners and work together to deliver fantastic places and to meet the supply challenge. We need to be trusted by investors. Housing associations get a lot of our finance through private investment, and it's really important that we are well governed and that we make good, sound business decisions. And we need to be trusted by government to deliver what we say we're going to. And that's our third part of our strategy, which is around delivery. We are absolutely committed to solving the housing crisis. Housing associations built 25% of all homes last year. We were up 10%. We want to do a lot more. But in order to drive up delivery, we can't do it on our own. We need to work with everybody in this room, but in particular, we need to work with local government, we need to work with investors, and we need to work with central government. So great to have Esther on the panel to go next.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Is it just me, or is it chilly in this room? It is. I'm holding on to my cup of coffee here for a bit of warmth.
Too warm, yes.
But never mind. So anyway, so first of all, we're talking about is fixing the housing market and an election winner for Blue Collar Britain. So first of all, what is Blue Collar Britain? Who are they? Well, they are just regular working folk up and down the country who, aspire to home ownership, who work hard, who are happy to do a fair day's work so long as they get recompensed, who want to pay into the system, who believe in fairness, so they'll pay the taxes to make sure that we've got a good public sector. Many of them will work in the public sector, but they want to know that all that hard work, all that graft will actually pay off for them. Basically, what was it all for? What have I got for me at the end of my working week? And what can I hand on maybe to my children? A little bit of something for all the work I've done. So most people do look to have a home. That is a little bit, not only a nest, but also a nest egg for them and for their children going forward. Now, these blue-collar Britons, these blue-collar people predominantly actually voted for Brexit. And why did they vote for Brexit? Because they did believe in control of their own lives. So actually they can shape their own sort of fortunes, and they can shape their own future. If they're going out to work every day, what have they got control over? But at the same time, they also believed that government should be responsible too. So control of government. What about sovereignty? You should be responsible for what is going on. So it was about opportunities going forward. We think if we were in charge of our destiny, then we can go forward. And when we know, because most blue-collar Britons are pragmatic, they are canny, they look at trends, see what's happening going forward, and when they realise 90% of all future growth was coming outside the EU, well then why wouldn't they want to be outside the EU looking at those opportunities? So it's outward looking, optimists invariably, aspirational, not just for them but for the others and for their community too, and this is where the fairness comes in. So in a way they felt abandoned. A lot of them would have been traditional Labour voters. But after Brexit, and with Labour not necessarily knowing what it's doing, where it's going, how that vote's going to work, they thought, well, you're not interested in us anymore. And a lot of blue-collar people just traditionally would have voted Labour, because they would have said, oh, my dad voted Labour, my dad's voted Labour, oh, if I voted for anything other than Labour, my parents would turn in their grave. But now, with the Brexit vote, with other things happening, they're looking afresh at the Tory party saying, do you know what, we do actually share a lot of things. We've got a lot in common, whether that is about law and order, whether that is about home ownership, whether that is about social mobility, self-empowerment, all of these things, helping the next generation do better than us. Actually, we believe in that too. And that is why, yes, this would be, if the Tories got it right, seized on what is there, this would be a winning opportunity for, I would call them, the salt of the earth people who just want to know that after all their hard work, they've got something to go forward to. And actually, for too long, they felt there's been a break between what they do and what they get back in return for all that hard work. So we, as a government, have to say, how do we build more homes? And more homes for everybody, whether that is council, whether that is social, whether that is private or whether that is rented. But knowing people might want to start or might start off in council, but they might end up in private because they want something for them at the end of the day. And that journey and that notion of choice is key. Choice, freedom to do different things, freedom to move forward in life. So what are we doing? How are we going to look at public sector land and maybe make it available for key workers so that all of their money hasn't gone on rent, but actually they can save a deposit to buy in the future? How do we come forward with new schemes, whether it is right to buy, whether it is rent to buy, whether it is shared ownership and getting that right, whether it is building a home yourself on a plot of land that you have found? How are we unleashing all of that? And we know we've got to build 300,000 homes by the mid-2020s. I hear you all gasp there. That is a lot of homes. And why? It's because demand has outstripped supply for many, many years, and there is a backlog there, and we have got to get on top of that, because otherwise the market isn't working. We're coming up with initiatives to try and make it work, but actually we have got to get the market right in the first place so houses are affordable, so there are varieties and we can help people. And there are a whole host of houses too. It's not all family homes. People are single, maybe for longer, or single again later on in life. People are disabled and they need homes, and different types of homes with greater access to. And people who come out of university or have been used to living in a group household are looking for things like co-living. So we should be looking at all of these opportunities out there, different styles of living. And also, when I talk about 300,000 homes a year that we will be building, that is a massive jobs market out there, predicting another nearly 200,000 jobs for a new generation of people coming out. And if we look at modern methods of construction, so that it won't all be on site, it will be built in a factory, which are now quicker, sleeker, faster, more environmentally friendly, have 80% fewer defects, can be built in a fraction of the time. All of these are opportunities we open up. So blue collar, it's as simple as this. Blue collar, just talk about opportunities. Blue collar, talk about fairness. Blue collar want to know what they've got at the end of a working week. And invariably, at the end of the year, it's something that is called a home. And that's what we've got to do.
So I suppose the question at the heart of this is what policies will win over blue-collar workers. But I think that the subtext to that as well is, and are these policies that the Conservative Party can get behind? Because what's happened over the last 10 to 20 years is that the Tory party has become the party in housing policy of the NIMBYs, of the asset owners, and has not become the party of people who want to buy their own home who can't afford to. And the most recent example of that probably is under Theresa May. There was a more ambitious housing agenda that was discussed and killed off by number 10 because of the fact that it would alienate a lot of voters in the sort of Maidenhead, Thames Valley type constituencies with which Theresa May is very familiar. And so I think the problem the Conservative Party has is that it has become seen as the party that favours those who are already up on the ladder rather than those who are struggling to get onto it. And I think that one of the aspects of this is to look at why are prices so high in housing. And the fundamental reason is that obviously demand is outstripping supply. But if you also look into exactly why it is the market isn't working, you have to ask, how did we get into this situation whereby supply isn't responding to demand? And so what you've had over the last more than 20 years is effectively a situation where credit is pumped into the housing market and prices go up and up and up. And this system worked for generating wealth when you had home ownership rising. So as long as more people were buying houses than were unable to buy houses, then you got a wealth effect generated from this where everyone felt richer and richer, and although they were borrowing more and more, they were going to be able to pay that off and pay for their retirement. But the problem that we've now got is that home ownership is now going down. We've reached and gone beyond the tipping point whereby prices are simply too high, that the wealth effect is, for a lot of people, gone into reverse. They feel poorer and poorer because prices are going out of reach. And in fact, the economic policies that have been adopted, like Help to Buy, actually exacerbate that problem. But it's difficult for governments because effectively too much of the economy has become a sort of bet on the housing market. And Help to Buy effectively had its intended effect in terms of pumping back up the bubble and getting growth going again, but it didn't actually solve the problem of people being able to buy houses, because all it actually did was expand the supply of credit to a particular subset of people, and whereas the majority just found prices, again, moving further out of reach. So I think policies like that are directly counterproductive to the direction that the Conservative Party needs to go, and if it wants to become a party that appeals to people who don't already own assets but want to own them. And in fact, you've seen support for the Tories, like clockwork, falling among people in their 30s and 40s who would previously have owned houses and who now can't. So on the left, this has risen up the agenda and become this. There's a word that's become this sort of buzzword for this, which is financialization, that chunks of the economy are becoming owned by big finance. And it's a kind of conspiracy theory about the idea that, hedge funds or whoever it is, they're not too clear who, but lots of big money is being pumped into the system for the benefit of the wrong people. And there's all these developers, and they're all profiting off it. But the fact is that what we're seeing is basically this is an effect of the price getting out of whack with demand. And there are actually policies that are directly fueling this. And the question is just whether the Conservative Party can be bold enough to be the party that abolishes them. And I'm talking about policies like council tax becoming totally out of whack with the value of houses, not being uprated for years and years. And so the top slice of council tax, the top band of council tax encompasses a vast range of homes. Stamp duty, making it extremely expensive to upsize or downsize or do transactions at all, which is gumming up the market. The huge inheritance tax break on land, which causes a lot of money to be funneled into land when it could go to more productive assets, and the massive tax break on CGT for your primary residence. And the funny thing about all of these distortions is that right now it's actually the Labour Party that is saying they will get rid of them. I was at Labour conference last week, and amongst a whole list of totally crackpot policies, there is actually a section of their policies that involve removing these crazy distortions from a market that everyone needs to use for a basic quality of life. And that's the Labour Party proposing removing these distortions, not the Conservative Party, which is meant to be the party of people who own homes. So I would say that the right needs to take a total look again at the housing market. And as part of that, there should be a total review of the way the planning system works. Because it's not enough to remove the distortions, you also need to make it possible for people to feel like the developments that are going to happen in their area that need to happen are the right kinds of developments. And right now what you have is a system that is broadly viewed as inept, corrupt, unresponsive. It builds stuff that people don't like the look of and they don't want and they can't buy. And it's also a system that's incredibly bureaucratic and slow, and therefore the market can't adapt to what's needed. And so I think what needs to happen is you could sort of brand it in a populist way that would be give people a sort of an equivalent of a Thatcher right to buy, which is how many of the blue-collar voters were won over in the 80s, which would be to tip the planning system and the credit system in favor of people who just want to buy a house, rather than in favor of people who already own houses and in favor of massive asset owners who develop and sell houses. And we can see that the market is working for certain sectors and not for others. And it's leading to these distortions, like the fact that there is probably going to be a massive oversupply in London of so-called luxury apartments, that is, apartments that cost far too much money for anyone to buy, that aren't very nice to live in. They're usually wall-to-ceiling glass. They're kind of like boxy offices. And there's something like more than 50,000 of these apartments being built in the moment at London. And there's probably going to be a huge crash in prices over the next few years, or there's certainly a risk of that. And yet we have families who want to buy houses who are totally priced out and having to move to the middle of nowhere where they have an hour-and-a-half commute to get in to do their job. So I think that, but the upside of all of this, if there is one, is that the huge rise in asset prices means that there is a potential windfall there for councils and for a government that is bold enough to use it. And so if councils, with the support of government, actually can get things moving and decide they're either going to sell off land or build enough houses, the huge uplift in value that giving planning permission to land delivers means that there's actually potentially a lot of money there to make the housing nice, to make it popular, to build all the road improvements that are needed around it, so that residents don't get justifiably angry about the effect on their local area. And the question is just whether the Conservative Party is going to be the party that does this in a moderate way that leads to individual home ownership, or whether it's going to be the Labour Party collectivising everything and taking over housing for the benefit of the state, essentially. So I would say the Conservative Party needs to rethink its approach and be a lot braver in taking on vested interests.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. I was going to say some of those things, but I'll say something else now. I mean, there's a sort of triumvirate of policies that that partly reflect, that people talk about as partly reflecting the Tory party's new, well, it's not actually that new, but sort of perhaps bigger so-called blue-collar constituency, partly as a result of Brexit. Incidentally, people don't actually really wear blue collars at work any longer.
What colour's yours?
Although, well, exactly. I was thinking I'm wearing a blue collar, and in fact, most of the men in the room are wearing blue collars. When we talk about blue-collar Britain, I think actually probably what we mean is non-graduate Britain. And the three totemic policies that are talked about in the sort of post-Brexit policy landscape are adult social care, housing, both social and private, and non-university post-school education, Auger Review, FE colleges and so on. And I think those are actually, that is quite a good triumvirate of policies to focus on. And I think, obviously, these policies are not just of interest to lower income Britain, they're of interest to pretty well everybody getting these things right. And getting them right is also just a general signal of competence, something we sort of forget in these more polarised times, that actually voters are looking for, general competence in their governments. And the ability to, as it were, move with the times and deal with the kind of blockages, the kind of policy blockages that Juliet was just talking about, whether it's, the council tax not having been sorted out now for decades. Everybody agrees about a lot of these things. Everybody agrees that the planning system needs to be completely revised if we are going to be able to build lots of houses. I think it is true that these issues play differently, not just in different socioeconomic groups, but also in different parts of the country. So I think housing is a bigger issue in London and the South East than it is in the Midlands and the North, which is not to say that it's not a big issue in the Midlands and the North. But I think what's the affordability ratio, I think, in London and the South East is something like has gone up 3 times. So that this is the ratio between what median income and average house prices. It's gone up 3 times. It's gone up from 4 to 12, I think, in London and the South East. But it's still doubled in most of the rest of the country. So it still clearly is a very big issue. One of the, house building actually is sort of coupled in some ways with the third of those totemic policies, because we've had a training disaster in the construction sector over the last few years. Last year, I think, just 8,000 construction apprentices started their apprenticeships. 8,000. It's an astonishingly low figure. How the hell are we going to build 300,000 houses if we have nobody with the ability to build them? I suppose if we build them in factories, we partly get round this problem. There aren't any bricklayers, there aren't any people who know how to build houses any longer. And not only are we not training anybody, but a quarter of the construction workforce is going to retire in the next 10 years. So, it's hardly surprising that half the construction workers in London are born abroad. Free movement has helped to get round the problem in the short term, but if we are going to make free movement somewhat less free, then we are going to have to start training people. The other thing about training is that the levels of training have been going down, not up. So most of the construction apprenticeships are now just level 2. They're not even at the sort of A-level level. They're at sort of GCSE level. Really, really basic. It's still construction is still the biggest single employer of young men in Britain. but they are not adequately trained, and we're going to face a crisis in that area unless we do something about it. I mean, just one other, perhaps slightly tangential point. I mean, in relation to partly to the politics of this, as well as the sort of social justice elements. One of the other areas where I think the left sort of score a powerful emotional point in the housing story is this whole question of housing benefit and social cleansing. Now, I have to admit, I'm not an expert on this, but you constantly hear the story about, I mean, despite the fact that we spend, sort of 30 billion quid a year on housing benefit, that there are there are large areas of the country where rents are very high, where housing benefit simply does not cover the cost of rent, and people have to move. I mean, people who've often lived in a certain place for decades or indeed for generations are finding themselves having to move. Now, I'm not quite sure how one deals with that problem. I mean, maybe Kate has some thoughts on that. I mean, but it sort of strikes me that it would be a if more of the housing benefit can go to housing associations, then at least it is going to people who are then going to build houses with it, rather than it just going to private landlords. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to put Juliet's challenge of whether the Tories are capable of tipping the housing market in favour of people who want to buy a home to Esther. Are they capable of doing it?
Tipping their market to
In
the
favour of
working.
people that want to, into blue-collar places.
But the great thing about the Tory party has always been its ability of choice and to reach out. And what it's got to do is, for those who are happy in their house and can afford it, that's great. But for those who are trying to get onto the housing ladder, how are we helping them? You're quite right. The help to buy should never be about help to profit for an organisation or a help to boost somebody's bonus packet. It has to be a help to get somebody in the market. But I think we can all agree that the actual market isn't working. If the market were working, we wouldn't have to be putting in all of these sort of new initiatives. So what we have to do is ensure that we are building more to make sure that there is a level playing field for people to come in. So yes, we can, and we should be the party that looks at tax incentives to make sure that we're building on brownfield land, of which there are 1 million homes to be built there. So we should be saying, how do we do that? We should also want to be open up our mind to, well, what sort of homes are we talking about? Let's have different types of structures and outlooks. So when I'm looking at some of the latest designs, they're talking it's a sort of a co-living sort of construct for people between, you're talking about the age ranges of sort of 20 to 30 who've maybe come out of university or had an apprenticeship, and within that they could buy a room or an apartment within there, 40 to 100,000 pounds, so they're on the property sort of ladder, they've got that, and yet they live in a community, so down below there could be a gym, there could be places to eat, there could be different things, but it is a start of that transformative way of living. We don't all want to live in a family home, and things are different, and we just have to look at this new tech age, and different ways of living, and utilise it better. So old municipal buildings or libraries, we want to keep a library, but could we make that a part of some sort of housing development? And then you've got a place for education, you've got a place for the kids to go, if you're a young mum, somewhere for your kids to go, and you could have an apartment round there. I just don't think we're thinking in a different way how we're going to house people, hence permitted developments come in. If it's not right for sort of factories or office blocks, or we don't need them anymore, we might need housing there. Town centres, we might not want as many shops there anymore. So how do we get houses there? Or could we go up 2 different extra floors? So it's up vertical, not horizontal. We've got to think in creative ways to house our population. And I think as a Tory government that is thinking outside the box, of course we can do all of that. And the modern methods of building, on new places for young people to work, but actually modular constructs could go on into small already built up areas, could go within another construction. We've just got to start thinking of things in a different way, industrialising and having a homes and a housing revolution. And if we did that, the UK could be the centre of global standards, safety, quality, beauty. This is a great little policy booklet, but I say that. And that's what we could do, and that would be as big as the automotive industry if we were exporting that 40 billion a year. We've just got to start thinking bigger than we were before.
Brilliant. All right, let's go to the audience for questions. Name, organisation, and a question, not a speech. So we go to the gentleman at the front and then the gentleman in the second row.
I was just interested in the point you were making
Name and
about...
organisation.
Oh, I'm a councillor from Stirling Council, and we have to build houses as well. What I was wondering was, you were talking about modular design, mass production. I was wondering what exploration you had into that, because that's something that's been discussed by design teams like Archigram in the 70s. So we're now many years forward. What are we looking at with that?
And then the gentleman
Roy Berman, a councillor from Lewes in Sussex. We also have to provide housing. I'm very concerned, and have been for a long time, about the imbalance of our economy, where too much money is locked up into house property and not enough being put into productive use. And we, as a Conservative government, need to find a way of unlocking that without damaging our voter base, who are already well invested. Is there not a method that we can provide incentives for the market price of homes to be lowered and provide homes and alternative investments for those who are looking for ways to save for their futures?
Yeah, I think basically probably the only way to do it is to throw a lot of money at it. So you're completely right that basically the problem is if you solve this issue, you basically erode a huge chunk of the Tory voter base who have been doing what they've been incentivized to do, which is to put all their money into housing. And really the only way out of that is to effectively lob a load of compensation at those people while changing the policy going forward. And I mean, it would be heavily criticized from the left in the sense that you would effectively be bunging money towards people who already own assets. But I don't really see another way to do it without essentially opening yourself up to the accusation of huge unfairness and sort of asset erosion and savings depletion. And so I think basically if you throw a massive one-time amount of money at it, and maybe you could get that money from granting a lot of planning permission and thereby creaming off a lot of the value uplift that generates. But I think that's probably the only way out of it.
So on the modular design and construction, there's some fantastic innovation happening in England at the moment. I've been out to see some factories. I've been to a factory in Basildon that's by Swan Housing Association. There's one by Accord in the West Midlands. In Gateshead, there is Home Group's Innovation Village, where they're trying out lots of different types of modular construction. There's some really great stuff happening. It has the advantages of changing the construction workplace, so actually working in quite a different environment, getting in apprenticeships, building very sustainably, building really highly efficient homes so that actually fuel bills are much cheaper when you move in. Speed of build, great. But it's still kind of a cottage industry. So we don't have great understanding across the country in terms of local authority awareness and planning. Some of the homes I've seen have not been great design. They've kind of just been a sort of repeat design of what we've done in the past, rather than actually being really innovative, beautiful, fantastic with all the other placemaking. And from our sector, we really need a supply chain. So we need to have enough development plots to go for it in a big way. So rather than investing in lots and lots of small little factories, actually working together in partnership, working with Homes England and with government to ensure that we can actually get the economy of scale to make the investment work, to bring the cost down of doing it. But I think there is massive potential, and it is part of us getting to that 300,000 homes a year.
Well, I mean, Kate said most of it there. It is starting up here. We do thousands of homes. Yes, being and visiting, what they can do sort of for this sort of eco-zero carbon home is incredible. When you're saying people then don't have any sort of bills for sort of heating a home. That has to be a way forward if you're looking at affordable homes in the round. Absolutely. And equally, you know, you're gaining insight from other countries. So Sweden, 84% build that way. Japan, a significant amount of build there. So you'll see a developer from Manchester, Urban Splash, doing a development with Sekisui, a Japanese company. So this is sort of on the increase. In fact, the very first factory built, wouldn't have been a factory built, but in fact modular built home, sort of Britain did in 1627. It went out to North America. We have been doing them. We just never industrialised it at all. I mean, last year you had your first 3D printing home. In France, for a family, you've got them, and that takes a day to print, 2 days to put up. I mean, it's incredible where we are going. We shouldn't be left behind. But the traditional build, yes, is there. And then going back to why did people, I remember originally put money into housing, a lot of people became landlords by default when they didn't have their pension, and it was a safe place to put their money. And as the saying always goes, God ain't making no more land. In a way, people thought it was a safe place to put their money and look after it. But what we've got to do is say, how do we make it work better now and work for all of society, and look at the land gains and look at what councils and government can do with the public land that they own. Absolutely.
Actually, just a very brief one. I mean, there is one bit of the housing market that seems to work quite well at the moment, and that's building student accommodation. I mean, you go to any university town, it's full of cranes building. So why is that? Why is it that one bit of the market seems to work? I mean, presumably because there's a huge amount of investment in it, and it's sort of I mean, one of the reasons why training is a big problem in construction, there are lots of small companies, a lot of people are self-employed, but also it's been very, very cyclical. It's been a very cyclical industry in recent years, and that is partly because we haven't been building enough houses. There isn't that sort of impetus of having that kind of 300,000 a year. If you had that, then you would partly get round that problem, and you would be able to train more people, even if they're working in factories now rather than building houses in the old-fashioned way. But the other, one of my other bees in my bonnet about this is why we don't subsidise granny and grandpa from people converting, garages or rooms in their houses, expanding them into. Why don't we subsidise that? Because it would, it's a sort of it's a double win. I mean, on the one hand, you relieve pressure on the adult social care system, and you also release, large numbers of very large houses that old people are continuing to live in.
Student housing has a much easier route for planning system than your average home. It's the short answer.
It's a different size.
Yes.
Yeah, different size
We're going to
qualifications.
go for one more question quickly, because I know Juliet has to run. The lady on the corner.
Thank you. Start waving if in doubt. So my name's Juliet Bolton. I'm a house builder in the Northwest. I've been doing it since 1997, but I don't build on green belts, so don't hate me. Over the last few years in this Conservative government, certain things have affected me for the good. For a start, we've got Homes England, which effectively is a development finance company for people who own the land. So the change to that has meant that 3 years ago...
Can I accelerate you to the question, please?
Sorry?
Can we fast forward to the question, please?
Yeah, well, I mean, the question is really, it's just to give balance. That we're hearing a lot of negativity. And yes, I think it is a vote winner that we build more houses because, I regularly canvass on a Saturday morning. And yes, I agree with Esther that blue-collar thinking, that is totally true. And we do need to build more. But I would just like to just finish and say that, yes, I've been helped to build more. So now I've got 5 sites, whereas before I had 2. And also, no one's mentioning the lifetime ISA for the younger people now, so that for every £1 that they put in the lifetime ISA, there's 25 pence comes from the government, which is helping my children save up, whilst they're at university. And I'd also like to say that permitted development rights have been increased, and that has speeded up my development. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well,
An injection of positivity in the room. That's what we needed.
yeah, the government needs to help you build even more homes, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's been a lot of very useful, calling them tweaks makes them sound very small, but actually an accumulation of tweaks that has actually got things moving. But I think the issue is that the backlog is so severe and enormous that to move the dial electorally, I think a lot more needs to happen still.
Two more questions from the audience. Gentleman right at the back in the corner, and then yes.
Thank you. Mike Leonard from the Building Alliance. A lot of propaganda about MMC, modern methods of construction. Nothing much modern about these porter cabins and timber-framed units. In fact, a lot of de-skilling. Young people young people without skills with nail guns, working in quite primitive conditions, albeit inside. My question really is about safety and about an ageing population. In the last 8 weeks, we've had 6 major fires, 2 in hotels, 1 in a care home, and 3 major residential units, all modern methods of construction, a mixture of steel and timber, all totally destroyed. Is that the type of construction that we want to recommend for our ageing population and to keep people safe in the future?
So thank you very much for raising the question of building safety. As an organisation that represents housing associations, the appalling tragedy that happened at Grenfell Tower just over 2 years ago has ensured that we now, as a sector and as a country, put building safety as an absolute top priority. Everybody who lives in a home, whether it's a high-rise building or not, has a right to feel safe as well as be safe, and that is really, really important. And I think in terms of the building safety agenda, we are committed to doing whatever it takes to ensure all of our properties are safe, however they are constructed. But there are 3 things that we would really like from government. I think firstly, one of the lessons with the ACM cladding is that we really need coordination. So as a sector, we are working hard to remediate all of the buildings that have ACM cladding on that are high rise, and we will continue to do so, and we've really welcomed the support from government to do that. But we have, and this isn't just housing associations, it's property developers, it's anybody with tall buildings, so councils, private sector, us. We've all been competing for the same scaffolders, for the same fire safety experts, and actually there's a role for government there in coordination so that we're able to prioritise. Secondly, we do need a role from government around clarity of products. And we know that ACM cladding is not a safe product. What we don't have clarity on right now is things like composite fire doors. And I know this is a bit techie, but actually we really need to know the results of the tests, because as a sector that provides homes to 6 million people, that's a lot of doors to invest in. And we need to make sure we're making the right decisions for the long-term safety of our residents. And then thirdly, we massively welcomed the Building Safety Fund for the ACM cladding. That's been hugely helpful for ensuring the sector is taking action. What we would call for is to have an ongoing conversation around building safety and funding that, because as more things come forward, when we've been building, constructing, commissioning buildings that we've taken on, that we thought were safe, that were fully signed off and compliant, if they are no longer safe, we really want to work with government to how we address that. Now, housing associations won't wait to address the safety issues, but it is important that we have a conversation about the cost of that remediation to make sure that's balanced with also with our ambitions for being able to continue with supply.
Safety is a key part of your home. If you want to sleep soundly at night, you want to know it is a safe space for you. And as you mentioned, some of the fires that have happened, in particular sort of Grenfell, and what has happened from there with the overarching safety review and the standards that need to be met on whether it's the type of sort of cladding, whether it's the type of structure, whether it's the height and the sprinkler system and the support within that, all of that has to be addressed, and it is being addressed. But we still sort of have to move on, and housing is something that really hasn't been industrialised. And when I say industrialised, that is to make it sleeker and smarter and safer and more environmentally friendly. These are the things that we are looking to do. And the traditional build, quite right, I mean, that is fundamentally the major part of it. But we've got to think of different ways to do things. But I totally agree with you. Safety for everybody, whatever house type you are in, has to be key.
Right, we'll go for a couple more questions. So there's the gentleman at the front here, and then the gentleman on the right at the far right. And please introduce yourself with one sentence. Sorry, no,
Me first.
Yes.
Okay.
One sentence and then with a question mark, please.
Okay, my name's Matthew Fardo. I'm a councillor in Lincoln, but my day job is also in private rental. My question, in a nutshell, is first of all, I think there is a massive demonisation of many landlords. Every landlord is apparently a fat cat portfolio holder, and they're not. Some of my landlords, the money from that rent goes to pay for the care of a parent whose home it was. In addition, I think there's also a massive demonisation towards single mothers with children who sometimes need to get out of abusive relationships. And many of my landlords are not prepared to take a risk on them as tenants because of the uncertainty of payments when it comes to housing benefit or the uncertainty of universal credit. So first of all, what is the government doing to help address the concerns of my landlords, but also to help serve the needs of people who do need housing where social housing isn't able to accommodate that?
And then the gentleman.
Thank you, Nicholas Heslop. I'm leader of Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council in West Kent. Given that the average length of time is 70 weeks from when a local plan is submitted to the inspectorate and the final sign-off by the inspectorate, would the Minister put more pressure on the planning inspectorate to actually help speed up the process?
Okay, where do you want to? Oh, do you want me first? Okay. Well, if I start with that one, the whole planning process from start to finish, in whichever route you have gone, and if it's had to go to the inspectorate, does need to be speeded up, and that is what we're doing at the moment through an accelerated sort of planning process and green paper. How do we get rid of the issues within it, and how do we incentivise it so that you know what you're getting at the start? And that really was where the sort of the local plan, that was what that was about. What do you want in your area? How do we prioritise it? What do you need home builds in that area for the next however many years? So yes, you're right, because the process as it works it is in some regards confrontational, in others costly and delays, and surely it would be better if the money was spent on the product and not on the passage to get to building the house. So absolutely. Regarding sort of landlords and tenants, you're quite right. Not every landlord is earning loads or is a bad one or this, that, the other. But I think what we've got to look at there is the relationship. It is fundamentally a relationship between the tenant and the landlord. And we want good landlords and we want good tenants. And how do we do that to enable that relationship to go on? So we cannot demonise landlords, and all landlords, whether it's housing association, whether it's councils, whether it's private, all have to adhere to a certain standard. That's without doubt. And regarding universal credit, it should be paid direct to the landlord. In fact, they are doing those changes so that it can go direct there. So the most vulnerable people who aren't necessarily very good at the moment, have other issues in their life, they need extra support, aren't very good at paying their bills on time and making sure the rent is paid, needs to get support in that way, is to make sure it goes to, and that is something that is a piece of work that is ongoing, that needs to be completed.
And I just say the longer term solution for people who are vulnerable. So you mentioned a single parent with children, and actually being in the private rented sector might not be the best place for them. So ideally what we need is more social rented homes and the investment into that, because social rents are generally 50% of market rent. So actually the welfare system will cover the cost of housing if you're in a social rent. But it's also the security of tenure. It's being able to have a different type of environment if you are within social rented housing. So I think that's the longer term solution. But in the short term, where there is a shortage of that type of tenure, it's around how we can support the PRS to be more stable by making sure that the welfare support actually covers the cost of those rents.
Let's go for a final round of questions. So there's a gentleman here and then a gentleman. Oh, sorry, just third row back.
Hi, quite loud. Good afternoon. My name is Dominic Williamson. I work for St Mungo's, which is a homelessness charity and a housing association. We provide lots of services to people who are moving off the streets or trying to prevent people going back on the streets. I've been working in this sector, in the homelessness world, for quite a long time. I actually started in around 1991, when homelessness had gone up, and street homelessness and rough sleeping had gone up. And what we've seen is that came down again and it's gone back up. And I guess my question is, does the Conservative Party have a way of delivering the choice and the step up the housing ladder at the same time as delivering a system that also meets the needs of those people who are desperate just for a home, and a housing ladder and a choice is not really their agenda? And I'm just wondering whether that's something that where there's a bit of a blind spot that this government now could actually do something about and address.
The gentleman. Hey, did you want to ask a question in the second round? You had your hand up. Yeah.
Terrible case of modesty. Sorry, Oliver Buckley-Mellor here from Policy Connect. We've heard a lot today about barriers to the growth of further education in the world of construction, as well as barriers to the growth of innovative practices such as modular buildings. I just wanted to ask the panel for their thoughts on whether or not in the next government there should be a more explicit commitment within the local industrial strategy system that local industrial strategies should have a clear commitment to supporting the growth of house building within their specific regions. Thank you.
There's a guy there. Oh, we'll take it. Okay, do you want to...
Trevor Wiltshire from Whitebridge in Cornwall. I'm a town councillor. My question is it possible for government to encourage local authorities to provide more serviced building plots to enable self-builders to build their own homes? It's the way I got on the housing ladder. And you do get butcher, baker, candlestick maker helping one another to build their own homes.
Okay, so we've got questions about homelessness, local industrial strategies and self-build. And we'll wrap up the panel as well. If we go along the panel, so Kate, would you like to respond to one of them?
Yeah, I'll pick the local industrial strategy point. I think the industrial strategy for the country includes some really welcome recognition in there of things like people in place, ageing society, green technology. It doesn't have housing in them. And actually, when we're translating the national strategy locally, of course we should be thinking about job creation, skills and training, alongside where people are going to live and making sure that those homes are affordable and accessible. So actually, I think there's a really big opportunity for local industrial strategies to have a strong focus on housing and in particular affordable housing.
David.
Well, yeah, I mean, just I'm not enough of an expert to be able to say anything sensible about most of the questions, but I mean, but actually the one thing that interests me is why it is that the greater freedom that local authorities have had in recent times to borrow in order to build houses, it actually doesn't seem to have been used very much. Now, and I assume that's because you can't just sort of snap your fingers and create the capacity to build houses if you've stopped doing it for the last 20 or 30 years. But that makes me wonder whether there is anything that the government can do, as it were, to sort of help speed up that capacity building that we want on the part of local authorities.
Esther. I'll do quick answers, but I'll answer them all. Regarding to homelessness, yes, we've put sort of extra money in there, but we as a government are tenure blind, as I'd say. So of course we need to protect the most vulnerable, and that could be into council or social. And then if we can help people get a safe place to live, then we can help them with whatever else it needs, whether that is employment, whether there is that support through addiction. So yes, that has to be where it starts. Regarding the industrial strategy, yes, of course we're now going to have to look into that. I would like to see across the north the centre of excellence for engineering and construction when we see what's being built here, what are the new innovative ideas here. So that would be part of a structure and a strategy thought through. And on I call it the right to build, we're doing a lot with that at the moment. How can we get service plots so people could come in if they chose to. And that could be working with veterans, that could be working with people who are unemployed, who would learn skills, do things, and then have a home at the end. And why I say with 300,000 homes to build, you don't actually have to be limiting what you're doing in any arena. We can help them all. But we had a little boost of positivity before. I'll give you it again. When we're talking about what has happened, at least this year, we built more homes than any other years but one in the last 30 years. So it is coming up. We're up to 220,000. So yes, we are doing it, but it's aligning all of the different things, from the planning to the land, to it fitting into a community that wants to make sure it's a beautiful build. All of these things, capturing the land value, making council homes. It's not a silver bullet. There are lots of things, and by goodness, we're working hard.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for coming. Can we thank the panelists in the normal way? Thank you.
No, my pleasure.